So why, let me ask you this, why did God make a promise to Israel? Because this is what, he mentions Pharaoh in the house of bondage. That's slavery. Remember that story. God says, I brought you out because I made a promise. So I want to backtrack. I want to find out, what did God say that caused him to bring the children of Israel out of Egyptian bondage? Backtrack to Genesis 15. You go from the last book of the Torah to the first book of the Torah, Genesis. A book that by its very name means beginnings. So guess where you're going to end up when you backtrack most of the theology of the Bible? To the beginning. You're going to end up in Genesis a lot because you're just working your way back down that river, down that stream, back to the source material. And here's the source material of the promise-keeping God. Genesis chapter 15. Listen to what he says to Abram in verse 13. He said to Abram, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs. They will serve them and they will afflict them 400 years. There's the prophecy of Israel in Egyptian bondage for 4 centuries. Right there. Genesis chapter 15. Verse 14. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge afterward. They shall come out with great possessions. So what was God's promise? Your kids are going to go into bondage. And they're going to last 400 years. That's 10 generations. 10 generations of slavery. But I'm going to bring them out. I promise. Right? So when we get to Deuteronomy and God says, you know why I love you guys? Because I made a promise that I'd bring you out. And we just backtrack to the promise. I got to ask another question. Why does God make Abram that promise? I mean, why tell Abram, I'm going to do this for your from your kids? Backtrack to verse 6. Genesis chapter 15, verse 6. And Abraham believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him righteousness. Okay, we ran that river. We've ran all the way up that stream, and look where we land. God has never recognized faith that led to righteousness until Genesis chapter 15, verse 6. But it shows us the heart of God. How does God want to view man? As righteous. And how does he want to do it? Through faith. Now let me explore this thought a little bit. I've been wrestling with this even just this afternoon, and I really want to try to work it out and articulate it. I think that faith is the language of heaven's relationship. I don't think that God is looking for faith out of us because God needs to be believed in. Like he has a security problem. Like, boy, I wish those people would believe in me. If they just believe in me, I'd bless them. I tell you what though, but if they don't believe in me, you know what? Forget them. You're either going to believe in me or you're going to get it. I struggle with that because that's not how I treat my son and my daughter. You know, you better believe in my love or you won't get it. No. Faith becomes the language that man uses to acknowledge to God that he understands the love of the Father. You see, I believe in God not because science has proved the Bible existed and all the stories existed and the bones line up and the DNA tests are... That's fine and dandy, but my faith isn't one bit in or out of whether Noah's Ark was a real boat. In fact, I couldn't care less. Because my faith is not in the validity of story. My faith is in the man, Christ Jesus. You see, I'll die on this hill. I believe in a resurrected Jesus. To me, that's the expression of faith. Now, because I believe in that, that's my posture towards my Father. I believe what you say about yourself, and I believe what you say about me. And to me, that's the communicable language of love between the Father and me. I would not know how to do that on the earth. See, Abraham believed God and God counted him for righteousness. But it's not very many generations later that Israel moves over into performance and law. And we don't hear the Old Testament telling people, hey, why don't you just believe God and be counted for righteousness? Because the moment law comes in, people begin to trust what they can do rather than trust how much He loves them. And man, when you put him into a performance-based system, will cloud what love is. And what will he do with that performance-based system? He'll feel like if he can keep the law, then he gets more from God. And if he breaks the law, he gets less from God. And God had to send Jesus to show us what love would look like. Because if all you do is look at the law, then the woman caught in the act of adultery has her brains bashed in and is stoned to death in the middle of the street. Because law does not have room to say to her, neither do I condemn thee. Now go and sin no more. But the heart of God says to her, I love you. How would we know that that was the heart of God if we didn't see it in Jesus? Because the Old Covenant says, if you break the seventh commandment, what do? You die. You're stoned to death. Jesus comes along and says, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. This is why it's tragic when people walk into our churches and we know what they've been doing, so we fashion our sermon around exposing their raw emotions so we can make them feel bad. Hopefully they'll come up here to the altar and get saved. People come in looking for hope, and all we do is hold a mirror up in front of them and show them their sin. And what we ought to be doing is introducing them to the man who isn't afraid to get his hands dirty in the middle of their mess and reach down and doodle in the sand and say to them, neither do I condemn thee, now go and sin no more. Oh no, I'm not dismissing that adultery's wrong. You didn't need me to tell you that. Your light, they dragged you by the hair down the street and threw you in the middle of the gutter. All of that taught you it was wrong. I'm here to be the one person to pick you up and say, you want to know why I'm on the earth? To show you love. This is what my dad really looks like. So if you trace it back to Israel, Israel's got the law. God makes promises to Israel. Why? Because God made a promise to Abram. Why? Because Abram believed God and God counted it to Abram for righteousness. And so it all goes back to faith.